A Libert Seguros agora é Yellow. Tudo aquilo que já era bom continua igual. Excelência e proximidade permanecem como nossa essência. Porque não é uma mudança, é uma evolução. A Yellow está sempre em sintonia com você. É liberdade com segurança. A melhor experiência acessível a todos os clientes, iluminando cada passo da sua jornada. Deixe essa luz iluminar seu caminho. Yellow Seguradora. Seguro para viver livre. Consulte seu corretor.
Today on CityCast Denver, Mayor Mike Johnston says Denver has become a national model in welcoming newcomers from Central and South America. But once they're here, they're swept up into a Byzantine immigration system that the mayor has no control over. So what chance do all these thousands of asylum seekers have of accessing the opportunity he promises? Colorado Sun reporter Jennifer Brown went inside the immigration courtrooms in the ICE facility in Aurora, and she's on today to explain how a new president could change everything. Today is Monday, November 4th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Jennifer Brown, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thank you, Bree.
So immigration is such a controversial issue right now, and I'm wondering, why did you want to spend so much time reporting on this particular aspect of it?
Well, I spent, the last couple years on and off reporting on a lot of other aspects of, the recent migration that we've had to Denver. And over again, people kept mentioning, when I would ask, do you have a work permit? How are you applying for asylum? They would try to explain what they thought the process was. And I was hearing all these different things, just the utter confusion of how things work in the federal immigration system and, where you apply to get a permit versus where you apply for asylum. Like, can you get a lawyer? Do you need one? There was just so much confusion that and I didn't know the answers to that either. So that's how the idea for this project started.
And you kind of just mentioned this, but you actually went to an immigration court here in Denver where people are going through this system. And I would love for you just to set the scene for us. Like, what goes on in the average day of an immigration court here in Denver?
Yes, I went to the federal courthouse on Stout Street in Denver a few times, and one time I went to the courtrooms inside the ICE detention facility in Aurora. So I spent quite a lot of time watching court proceedings. And, I didn't know it before, but when you go into the federal courthouse on the 3rd floor and the 8th floor, there are 6 different immigration courtrooms. There is a line pretty much every weekday morning of people speaking Spanish or French or Haitian Creole or whatever, lining up in the lobby of the courthouse. And upstairs, there are many signs, mostly in Spanish. People find their names on the wall on different dockets, and they have so many people that they have organized the courtrooms into language, basically. So multiple courtrooms will be held in Spanish. Some might be held in French or Haitian Creole or whatever they're grouping together that day, but the majority in Spanish. And the judge will speak in English and use an interpreter. The people will have headsets. A lot of the proceedings, especially like the initial appearances, will happen like as a group. Everybody in Spanish will swear to tell the truth, and the judge will tell them all their laws and, rights in English, and it will get translated. But it's really a chaotic scene in some ways because people, they just aren't sure where to go, and most often do not have any type of lawyer to help guide them through the process.
Let's talk about the lawyer situation, because that seemed to be something that you found, or at least shared it through your reporting, as a big issue with how these courts function. What does it look like in Colorado right now in these types of courts when it comes to representation for these folks?
Well, what I learned is that Colorado is now the lowest in terms of the percentage of people who have a lawyer in immigration court. And this is, mainly due to just the huge amount of people that have entered the court system, now up to almost 80,000 cases compared to like 18,000 just like 3 years ago. So it is a huge increase. And what I found is that Colorado in some ways is a little ahead of other places because we did create, the state legislature a few years ago created what they call the Immigrant Defense Fund. But, it's only funded with $350,000. They did bump it up a little this year, like one time only. But what most of that money is going toward is people who are detained in Aurora, and also for nonprofits like Romaine, the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network, to hold know your rights presentations and, run a help desk. And it's more like, here's a little bit of legal advice. But when you go in there, it's you versus the federal attorney from the U.S. Department of Justice, so you got to know a little bit about what you're doing. And a lot of people just don't.
Well, and let's talk about that, the role of the attorneys or the lack of legal support and the outcomes for these individuals, because it is interesting how you said it went from, something 18,000 in a couple years, it went up to 80,000. But the amount of access to pro bono attorneys is still the same, it sounds like. How does that lack of legal representation affect the outcomes for these folks?
Well, and I would say it's a little bit better than the same, but, they've added some money and, tried to help more people, but it's still like a drop in the bucket compared to how many people.
Right.
But really, the main thing that struck me, first of all, you've got people showing up to court. This is their first appearance. They might have already been here for several months or even longer because this backlog is so big. And they'll show up to court, with their family all dressed in their best clothes and bows in their hair. And it's almost like they think that they're presenting their children and family, and the judge will look at them and be like, okay, I like you guys. You can stay in the country. Instead, it's more like, no, you don't have to bring all these kids to sit up at the table in a courtroom. Come back in a year and a half or 2 years from now. Go try to find a lawyer. Like, it's so much more complicated. And one other important thing to mention is, our asylum application is 12 pages long. And you can fill that out. You have to get it translated to, English. As a, just a layperson could fill that out. But like there will be a part that says, why do you qualify for asylum? Why are you afraid to return to your country? And the space to answer is really small, right? If you have an attorney, they might write like 800 pages of attachments and documents and declarations and all these reasons why it's unsafe for you to return to your country. If you don't have a lawyer, you're just not going to do that. And so, the statistics are just pretty outrageous when it shows the likelihood of being deported if you don't have an attorney. I think it was 85% of people in Colorado without an attorney in immigration court were ordered deported versus 25% if they did have an attorney.
So it's kind of like anything else when you're dealing with the legal system, is like you need someone to translate the legal system for you, like how to navigate it. And so what you're saying is these folks will get this application and then they kind of don't know how to fill it. I wouldn't know how to fill it out without the help of an attorney, but they're trying to navigate it best they can. And in your reporting, you showed that like the outcomes just aren't great for folks who don't have that representation.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And a lot of part of the application, if you're trying to prove asylum, you're trying to prove that you were specifically persecuted in your home country. And to do that, lawyers would get declarations about the safety in a certain region of Venezuela or even a certain neighborhood. And they would collect police records and medical records of maybe someone who was injured by a gang or, all kinds of things that you could collect, or you could get mental health records about PTSD from living in this place. There's just so many things that you would have to prove in court that people are just not going to be able to get on their own, without the funds to do so or the means to do so. So It's quite a confusing process, even after working on this project for a few months, I still have so many questions about immigration rules and law. And, one thing is I kept hearing that maybe 50 or so attorneys in Colorado regularly practice immigration law. And a lot of attorneys would not want to take these cases because it's just so different than other courts. It's, too much to get into, and especially to take it pro bono and know that you're going to be doing this for years on one case.
Aqui no Spotify, muitas playlists são criadas através de inteligência artificial. A IA está em todo lugar, mas nem todo IA é igual. Desbloqueie experiências de IA mais inteligentes, fáceis de expandir e personalizadas para sua vida e seus negócios com os computadores Lenovo e processadores Intel Core Ultra, que transformam a sua experiência tecnológica. Acesse lenovo.com/smarter aí. Lenovo, inteligência artificial mais inteligente para todos.
RH, quer saber como voar no trabalho? É só usar a Flash. Com a Flash, você concentra toda a gestão de pessoas em um único lugar. Faça a admissão dos colaboradores e solicite mais de 8 categorias de benefícios. Ah, e você ainda pode fazer todo o controle de ponto. Conheça o novo onboarding integrado da Flash em flashapp.com.br.
So I want to hear about one of the people you talked to. How did Linda Torres end up in that Denver courtroom where you met her?
So Linda Torres came with her family from Venezuela, 3 children and her husband. A very typical, sad story of her journey of 4 months long. They actually spent a few years in Colombia, then left there to travel to the border in Mexico. And, what they went through, first of all, was just awful. The thing that sticks with me, she talked about her 3-year-old son after that journey, just bolting awake and screaming about catching the train. And that was because, of course they had jumped on and off trains as they were trying to travel here. So she presented to the border protection agents in Mexico and in Texas, I should say. And they said, "Where are you going to go?" And she was like, "Well, we are trying to make it to Chicago." So the way it works is, they're questioned. They might be detained for a couple days. Then if they don't see a reason to keep them detained, they will give them, will trigger the removal proceedings to begin, but they are allowed to pass. So she has a court date in Chicago Immigration Court in 2026. Well, then her family is so exhausted that while they're waiting for a bus that's going to drive them to Chicago, they see a bus that's going to Denver, and the bus to Chicago isn't going to come that day. And it's almost like they just can't face one more day of sleeping outside and standing around with, kids and everything. So they get on the bus to Denver. And that's how the family ends up in Denver. They live in an apartment in Aurora with some extra people that they met while living in the hotel shelters that Denver was providing when she got here. So she is one of the lucky ones who's she doesn't have a lawyer representing her per se, but she has gotten some legal advice by going to some of the free clinics that nonprofits and the city have been offering. And so she is at least working on, I think she was able to switch her court location to Denver.
So it's like a lot of these folks that are in Denver are kind of in a transition space where they are coming from somewhere else and they're trying to get somewhere else, and we're kind of the way station. What does someone like Linda Torres do for that 18 months till her court date?
Well, she is selling flowers and chocolates outside. She'll bring her little kids with her. She's enrolled in the city's asylum seeker program, which is a 6-month program where, you can take English classes, you can get job training, and the people in that program are basically don't have work authorization yet, but the city's helping guide them to the timeline, when they can apply for that. And the goal is like people will be legally authorized to work by the time they, graduate, so to speak, from this program. And it also comes with some help with paying the rent. So Linda is one of the lucky ones involved in that program. So her partner, I think, is getting, daily jobs here and there, and they're just doing the best they can. Like I said, they have 8 or 9 people living in their 2-bedroom apartment, all really in the same boat.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier the hotel shelter situation, which is part of Mayor Johnston's Newcomers playbook, which he's been touting all over the country. And we hear about all the work that the city of Denver is doing to welcome these folks. But on the other side of it, you've been digging into this broken system that newcomers enter when they get here. What do you think is the disconnect, or is there a disconnect here between because I have to say, until I read your reporting, I didn't know any of this side of this situation that these tens of thousands of folks are dealing with, because the city makes it sound like we're doing a pretty good job.
Well, the city's asylum seeker program, it is a good example for other states and cities. I mean, the downside of it is it's got 350 people enrolled. And we're talking about, 43,000 people who came through the city, and they estimate, half of them or so decided to stay. So we're talking about a few hundred people get to be part of this program versus, the 20,000 something who are trying to make a life in Denver. So I think that, the cynic in me, the journalist is like, what happens a few months from now when all these people have come who haven't been legally authorized to work, and, they're not able to make rent? Are we going to see evictions and more homelessness further down the line? That's what I'll be watching for to report on.
Sure. That's helpful, though, to think about how many folks are actually in the Newcomers program versus how many folks are here in Colorado waiting to go through this system. So speaking of what's going to happen in the next few months, we have to talk about this presidential election. Trump has made immigration his number one issue. He's threatened to deport as many as 21 million people. Harris or Trump, how do you think this election is going to change the reality of the people here in Denver that are trying to navigate these courtrooms and detention facilities you've been looking at?
Well, I think it's a huge issue that a lot of people talked about, especially immigration lawyers that I spoke to. And one of their big complaints about this system already is that, unlike other courts, immigration court is sort of subject to change depending on who is president and who they have chosen as their attorney general. And already, it's kind of a slingshot sometimes back and forth. So things could change dramatically, I think, especially if Trump is elected. But for example, one lawyer I talked to, she had a client who was seeking asylum based on the claim of domestic violence. It was dangerous for this person to return to their home country under that specific claim that was allowed in the policies. Well, that was until Trump was elected last time, and his attorney general, Jeff Sessions, changed that law, got rid of the domestic violence claim. And so this client's case was just dead. But then Trump was out of office and Joe Biden was in office, and the next attorney general restored the domestic violence claim. So, and that's just one person. I'm sure that happened to tens of thousands of people and, one part of the law, but it just, it's constantly going back and forth. It makes it hard for the judges, for the attorneys, and obviously for the people who are trying to make claims. So, I don't know what exactly either of these candidates would change right off the bat, but certainly, one could make it much easier for people being deported. Who knows?
Yeah, and even just the day-to-day process that these courts are going through could be disrupted with one change.
Mm-hmm,
So
of course. And I think the people, you said earlier, it's kind of like their lives are in limbo. Like maybe they do want to go back to their country in a few years if it gets better there. But they're also like, they could wait 5 years to find out if they got asylum or not. And, after all that time when your kids are going to school and, you've made a new life here and then you get deported because your asylum was rejected. I think a lot of people I spoke to, it's just hard to know like where they're headed. And then when you add our politics into it, it's even harder to know.
Before we go, I have to ask, do you have any hope for this to get better? Is there any story or person you came across that made you feel like there was some light at the end of all of this? Just, I don't know. Tough day to day.
Right. I found it inspiring to see what's going on with some of the nonprofits in our city. I spent a little time at an asylum clinic that was held by a nonprofit called the Colorado Asylum Center. And we went to a little church in the north part of town. And I didn't know what we were going to see when we got there. But you walk in and it was just like the whole, I don't know, maybe it was like a common area or eating area in the church, and it had just tons of little tables around the room, and it was packed of people speaking Spanish with, their kids with them and babies and sitting around tables, and all these volunteers just, out of the kindness of their heart, they're helping them. Like it would take like 4 hours for them to fill out the 12-page asylum application. And so they had volunteers who could speak Spanish, walking them through each part of it and, passing out bagels and muffins and coffee and treats for the little kids. And, it was heartwarming to see, like, in spite of it all, like, you hear about the bad news of people getting here and being victims of racism and other problems in the courthouse or whatever. But when you see these volunteers, like, helping them out, like, I think that people are connecting, I guess I should say, with kind people when they get here who are trying to at least help them through this like process of being in limbo.
Well, Jennifer Brown, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell a YouTube Spanish learner about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye-bye. I can't make words work today. Hold on. Give me a second. Whew.